When you picture ancient Egypt, you're almost certainly imagining a very specific 500-year window. The solid gold death masks, the monumental statues, the famous boy kings. Practically all of it belongs to a highly aggressive, hyper-expansionist era known as the New Kingdom, spanning roughly 1550 to 1070 BCE. But this era of supreme power didn't emerge naturally from a long peace. It was born out of profound humiliation. For roughly a century prior, Egypt had endured a deeply traumatic occupation. A Canaanite group called the Hyksos had settled in the Nile Delta and slowly seized political control over Lower Egypt. To break free from this occupation, a Theban prince named Ahmose I realized traditional Egyptian infantry wouldn't be enough. He needed to assimilate the superior military technology of the very people occupying him. The Hyksos had introduced the Egyptians to bronze weapons, the composite bow, and crucially, the horse-drawn chariot. Ahmose's forces mastered these tools, turned them against their former masters with devastating effect, and violently reunified the country. The trauma of the Hyksos occupation completely rewired Egyptian foreign policy. The pharaohs concluded that relying on natural desert borders was a fatal mistake. To prevent another occupation, they decided to strike first and push their military borders as far outward as possible. Looking at this map, you can see how successive pharaohs, especially Thutmose III, launched relentless military campaigns. He conducted at least 17 expeditions, expanding deep into Nubia to the south and pushing all the way to the Euphrates River in Syria to the north. This outward thrust forced massive clashes, most notably the Battle of Megiddo around 1457 BCE. Thutmose III shattered Canaanite resistance in an encounter that holds the historical distinction of being the earliest battle in human history with a detailed surviving written account. Notice how those expansion routes turn into supply lines. By dominating the region, Egypt extracted an almost endless supply of gold from the eastern desert of Nubia, while mandatory annual tribute from the Levant sent massive quantities of Lebanese timber and Cypriot copper flowing straight into the Nile Valley. This continuous loop, conquering territory to extract wealth, which funded the armies required to conquer more territory, turned the newly unified state into the ancient world's premier economic superpower. All that imperial wealth was funneled directly into stone. Pharaohs like the female ruler Hatshepsut launched staggering construction projects. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri was an architectural marvel of colonnaded terraces designed to blend seamlessly into the vertical limestone cliffs. But pouring resources into religious monuments created a major internal threat. The traditional priesthood of the god Amun, headquartered at the Karnak temple complex, accumulated immense landholdings and cattle. They eventually grew wealthy enough to rival the pharaohs themselves. To break the power of these priests, a pharaoh named Akhenaten triggered a massive ideological crisis. He closed the traditional temples, chiseled Amun's name off monuments, and attempted to enforce the worship of a single solar deity, the Aten, represented as a sun disk whose rays ended in human hands. This theological shockwave bled directly into royal art. For the first time, instead of flawless physical perfection, Akhenaten had himself depicted with highly distorted features, including an elongated skull, wide hips, and spindly limbs. The revolution barely survived Akhenaten. His successor, the famous boy king Tutankhamun, is known today for his golden tomb, but his primary historical function was undoing his father's controversial work, restoring the old gods and giving power back to the traditional priests. The new kingdom generated enough capital to build staggering physical marvels, but that same wealth destabilized the state by creating fierce, continuous internal conflicts over who actually controlled the money and the divine authority. The empire's obsession with projecting power reached its absolute zenith under Ramesses II. He understood that maintaining control meant managing his public image, and his primary strategy was sheer, overwhelming scale, carving his massive likeness into cliffsides and stamping his name on nearly every major monument in the country. Early in his reign, Ramesses faced a massive clash with the rival Hittite Empire at the Battle of Kadesh in modern-day Syria. It was the largest chariot battle in ancient history, involving thousands of vehicles on both sides, and it ended in a bloody, inconclusive stalemate. But Ramesses wasn't about to let reality ruin his image. Instead of admitting the stalemate, he returned to Egypt and carved exaggerated accounts of the battle onto his temple walls, depicting himself as a superhuman warrior single-handedly driving back the Hittite onslaught. He essentially invented state-sponsored propaganda on a colossal scale. Ramesses realized that to hold a vast empire together, manufacturing the illusion of absolute invincibility was just as critical as the military reality on the ground. The empire survived for centuries, but the fatal blow came from outside its borders. Around 1186 BCE, the entire eastern Mediterranean was engulfed by the Bronze Age collapse, a mysterious, rapid-fire catastrophe that wiped out neighboring civilizations in a single generation. The agents of this destruction were the Sea Peoples, a confederation of maritime migrants and raiders who attacked by land and sea. Pharaoh Ramesses III fought a desperate defense at the Nile Delta and successfully repelled the invasion, but the effort permanently exhausted the Egyptian state. The regional collapse inflicted a fatal structural wound on the empire. With neighboring states lying in ruins, long-distance international trade routes vanished, and the vital flow of foreign tribute abruptly stopped. Without that external revenue, the internal economy cratered. The immense cost of maintaining the military and the sprawling temple complexes drove rampant inflation, leaving the state unable to even pay the grain rations of the craftsmen building the royal tombs. The system was breaking down. Starving workers organized the first recorded labor strikes in history, and ordinary citizens grew so desperate they began looting the sacred royal burials in the Valley of the Kings on an industrial scale. By 1070 BCE, the state fractured entirely. The new kingdom proves that no empire, no matter how powerful its military or massive its monuments, can survive a systemic economic collapse. Yet, despite the empire's ultimate failure, the artifacts forged during its desperate pursuit of immortality still define our vision of ancient grandeur today.